well, no, not most recently, actually, there was another human book. A book called Selves, which draws on phenomenology, and of some excellent theses concerning panpsychism. So, thank you very much for your time.
Yeah. Well, I haven't got my epigraph up there, but I'll tell you what it is. It's in French. Tout a été dit, mais comme personne n'écoute, il faut toujours recommencer. Which means, translated, everything has been said, but nobody ever listened, so you have to go back and say it all over again. So I'm going to be doing a bit of that, but I'll also say one or two new things. So I'm going to say some things I've said before and quote some people I've quoted before. But as I say, also say some new things. You can see my title has changed because just before coming here I read David Papineau's piece on naturalism in the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy and realized that the word just meant everything. And so since it gave me freedom to decide what I was going to use it to mean, which is what I'm going to do. So I'm a naturalist in the current large, loose sense of the term. I'm a metaphysical naturalist. So clearly I deny the existence of anything supernatural. But of course one can't classify anything as supernatural until one has a substantive conception of the natural relative to which you can classify anything as supernatural. Well, I do have one. I assume that concrete reality is entirely physical in nature. I'm a physicalist or a materialist, and I take the terms to be the same. Physicalist, naturalist. I don't believe there's any non-physical concrete reality. And I take it that metaphysical naturalism is the same thing as physicalism is just defined. The view that concrete reality is entirely physical in nature. But there are serious questions to ask about what this amounts to. In fact, they're old questions with old answers. But they don't get enough attention these days. And one result of this lack of attention is that many analytic philosophers today who call themselves naturalists are, in fact, extreme anti-naturalists. They're false naturalists. So say I. The false naturalist and I may share a commitment to one mild species of methodological naturalism, another very wide term which I define as the view that all valid inquiry into the metaphysically contingent nature of concrete reality should proceed in accord with the methods of the natural sciences. But that doesn't actually reduce the fundamental gap between us, that is, me and what the people I'm calling the false naturalists. My commitment to methodological naturalism is imperfect by some philosophers' lights, because I take it, for example, that it's reasonable to say that we can and do know that there's natural necessity, that there are real forces in the world. And I take it to be obvious that real science as conducted by real scientists proceeds on this assumption. But some philosophers who call themselves naturalists are kind of pinched, epistemologically speaking, and they think that methodological naturalism either requires strict agnosticism on the issue of whether there's such a thing as natural necessity, or some of them go so far as to think that it requires denial even of the intelligibility of the idea of natural necessity. Well, I mention that merely in passing because it's not one of the major issues that separate me from the self-styled naturalists whom I believe to be false naturalists. I hope there's at least one here. I think there is, given the talk I just heard. But maybe there's so many phenomenologists here, you're probably not. May not have a sufficient target, never mind. So the major issues between me and them have to do with knowledge and ignorance. Our knowledge of the nature of conscious experience and our ignorance of the nature of matter, insofar as matter is something other than conscious experience. Certainly something extremely strange has happened to so-called naturalism in the last 30 years or so, when it comes to the question of consciousness. So Quine, take Quine. He, in his reductive passion and ontological austerity, has been thought to constitute a kind of benchmark for naturalism in philosophy. But he never for a moment denied the existence of conscious experience, as some false naturalists appear to do. He never denied what he called, and I quote, the heady luxuriance of experience, or, I quote again, experience in all its richness. So, Quine never quined qualia. But some self-styled naturalists today think that denial of the existence of consciousness is part of a thoroughgoing naturalism. Well, here I quote Jim Morrison, strange days have found us. How did this happen? Some perhaps thought they could move from a commitment to proceed in accord with the methods of the natural sciences to the view that the methods of the natural sciences can deal with everything there is, everything that exists. Well, they were wrong for at least 3 reasons. First, methodological naturalism doesn't warrant any such view. The move is illegitimate on the terms of methodological naturalism itself, as Quine knew. He just knew he couldn't say anything about conscious experience, so he used other things, as he said, as proxies for it. Second, the natural sciences make constant and essential use of conscious experience at every moment. Third, the natural sciences also take conscious experience as an object of study. Well, you might reply to the third objection by defining the natural sciences in such a way as to exclude experimental psychology. Some people do privilege physics like that, but it's extremely hard to see how you could justify that exclusion, and anyway, the other 2 objections would remain untouched. So, I've restricted attention to concrete reality in order to put aside questions about abstract reality. I take it that concrete reality equals the universe, and equally that one can identify concrete reality with spatio-temporal reality. The natural is the physical, is the spatio-temporal universe. So far, perhaps so good. But the word physical is a natural kind term. It's the ultimate natural kind term. And we may be very wrong about the nature of anything denoted by a standard natural kind term. So we may be very wrong about the physical. We can't be sure we know the nature and the limits of the physical. So we can't be sure we know the nature and the limits of the natural. We can't be sure we know the nature and the limits of the natural, even if we're right, as I'm assuming we are, that the natural is the physical. Well, that's putting it mildly for several reasons. One reason is that physics and cosmology are in turmoil. It's not just that we don't definitely know the nature and limits of the physical. We definitely don't know the nature and limits of the physical. And it doesn't help much to say that we have a clear fix on the physical in as much as we know that the physical is the spatio-temporal, because we're very far from clear about the nature of space-time. We may be very wrong about it, even post-Einstein. A number of leading physicalists and cosmologists think that the description of reality as spatio-temporal is superficial. So be it. In this paper by Space-Time Star, but actually I'm not going to say Space-Time Star, I'm just going to say space-time. But by space-time I'm going to mean, I should do this, the actual dimensionality. What do I point it at? Upside down, sorry. Where have I got to? Yeah, I've got to. Space-time. The actual dimensionality of the concrete real. Whatever the ultimate nature of that dimensionality. So I'm taking the word space-time to succeed in referring to and being a name for the actual dimensionality of the concrete real, even if we not only lack a full understanding of this dimensionality, as we pretty clearly do, but are also positively wrong about its nature in certain respects, as seems highly likely. So if Smolin and co are right that the actual dimensionality of the concrete real is a merger of space-time and momentum space, so it's an 8-dimensional phase space, then that's what I mean by space-time. I do take it that reality necessarily involves some dimensionality or other, some room to exist, or Existenzraum, which I'm calling space-time. But actually I don't take this to commit me to the view that concrete reality is something irreducibly distinct from its dimensionality, something which inhabits or is in space-time, as it were, while being distinct from it. I don't want to rule out the idea that space-time is in fact a good name for concrete reality itself. That is, I don't want to rule out the idea that there's no real distinction between what I'm calling the dimensionality of the concrete real, as if it were something distinct from the concrete real, and the concrete real itself. I wouldn't be at all surprised if there were in fact no such real distinction. Such a view is certainly well in line with, in fact it's a central part of, some of our leading physical and cosmological theories. I think Weinberg, for example, holds this view. But of course there's a sense in which it doesn't get us very far because we don't know the nature of space-time. So identifying the physical, i.e. concrete reality with space-time, doesn't necessarily enlighten you at all. So that's partly by way of illustration, that it's safe to say that we don't fully know the nature or limits of the physical. So we don't fully know the nature and limits of the natural. To that extent, a physicalist conception of the natural is less substantive than one might first have hoped. So that raises problems for how easy it is going to be for me to rule things out as supernatural. In spite of the spectacular achievements of physics, modesty is appropriate, or rather obligatory. We know there's a great deal we don't know or understand. It's sometimes said that for all our uncertainty, we have a pretty good fix on the basic nature of the physical. So David Lewis here says, I quote, that the physical nature of ordinary matter under mild conditions is very well understood. But this is certainly not true. It's not true even when we put aside a rather large point, that while the phenomena of conscious experience are wholly a matter of the physical nature of ordinary matter under mild conditions, according to physicalist naturalists, the physics and neurophysiology of the brain don't enable us to understand how this is so. I'm just putting that point aside. That's bad enough. But we're left with profound theoretical uncertainty, even when we put aside this point, about the nature of the so-called fundamental particles, for example, which extends to all conditions in which those things are found, including, of course, all mild conditions, and the same goes for gravity. So Lewis is triply wrong. A physicalist conception of the natural has nevertheless a great deal of substance. So I take it that vast numbers of the claims of current physics are straightforwardly true, or at the very least very good approximations to truth. So keeping it simple, the periodic table is onto something fundamental about the ultimate nature of reality, concrete reality, physical reality. So are, as far as I know, F equals ma, E equals mc squared. I think that's pretty dodgy these days. The inverse square law of gravitational attraction, the Bell inequality, the Schrödinger wave equation / Heisenberg matrix mechanics. In a word, numbers and equations. And this now raises the next point about ignorance. And it is, in a way, a Kantian point. Kant basically saw all this. But of course he had a very special metaphysical framework. And he wasn't the first. The point about all these things I just mentioned, well, not yet. Yeah, at the top. Point about them is that they're all truths about relational structures instantiated in concrete reality. They're expressed by mathematical equations, and they do not, as such, say anything at all about the intrinsic nature of the physical, insofar as the intrinsic nature of the physical is something over and above its relational structure. And here I quote Eddington, as I have before, his description of the achievements of physical theory, which remains as valid today as it was in 1928. Something unknown is doing we don't know what. That is what our theory, physics, amounts to. It doesn't sound a particularly illuminating theory. I have read something like it elsewhere. The slithy toes did gyre and gimble in the waves. There is the same suggestion of activity. There is the same indefiniteness as to the nature of the activity and of what it is that it is doing. And yet, from so unpromising a beginning, we really do get somewhere. We bring into order a host of apparently unrelated phenomena. We make predictions, and our predictions come off. The sole reason for this progress is that our description is not limited to unknown agents executing unknown activities, but numbers are scattered freely in the description. To contemplate electrons circulating the atom carries us no further, but by contemplating 8 circulating electrons in one atom and 7 in another, we begin to realize the difference between oxygen and nitrogen. 8 slithy toes gyre and gimble in the oxygen wave, 7 in nitrogen. And Descartes, who is, by the way, the true grandfather of physicalist naturalism, saw this already. All the properties of physical things, which we clearly and distinctly understand, are comprised within the subject matter of pure mathematics. Russell actually was sort of reawakened to this by Eddington. He put it like this: physics is mathematical, not because we know so much about the physical world, but because we know so little. It is only its mathematical properties that we can discover. For the rest, our knowledge is negative. So this point about the form of our theoretical knowledge of the physical is at the same time a point about the extent of our ignorance. Physics can tell us a great deal about the structure of physical reality insofar as it can be mathematically represented. And we may suppose that all wholly structural characteristics can be fully mathematically represented. But it can't tell us anything about the intrinsic nature of reality insofar as its intrinsic nature is more than its structure. We may certainly take it that the structure of physical reality is part of its intrinsic nature. Russell didn't actually, but that doesn't matter. So the structure is part of its intrinsic nature, so that physics does tell us something about the ultimate or intrinsic nature of physical reality in telling us about its structure. But structure as such, structure as mathematically characterizable, is a merely or purely abstract phenomenon which can't be said to exist in concrete reality unless there exists some concrete entity that realizes or exemplifies or instantiates or most simply has the structure in question and isn't just the structure mathematically understood. Well, getting this point about structure, and by that I mean genuinely getting it, is a revolutionary experience in a philosophical career. And I stress the word genuinely because it seems that many people seem that they acknowledge the point and then they sort of get used to it in such a way that they somehow manage to continue to breeze past it without really realizing how radical it is. So I'm a naturalist and a physicalist, a naturalist physicalist. Like, well, I had many in my paper, but now I just say maybe some of you, one of you. I think concrete reality is wholly physical, but I don't for a moment think that the science of physics can fully characterize the nature of concrete reality, even in principle. Some who call themselves physicalists or naturalists do appear to believe that the science of physics can fully characterize the nature of concrete reality, at least in principle. In fact, they seem to think that it's a commitment of naturalism or naturalistic physicalism to hold this view. But we know it can't be done. The Eddington-Russell point just given, which does have many anticipations in the history of philosophy, is conclusive. The point could also be made in another way, which I will consider shortly. So I call those who believe that physics can, in principle, fully describe or characterize the physical, I call them physicsalists. They're not physicalists, they're physicsalists. And they're not real or serious physicalists at all. Serious physicalists do hold, of course, that nothing non-physical exists, that nothing other than what physics talks about exists, but nevertheless that physics can't convey the nature of everything that exists, even though everything is fully physical. The Eddington-Russell point is again conclusive. You haven't got to first base as a naturalist or physicalist until you've understood this point and its consequences. And I like to think that the a posteriori physicalists who are led, unknown to them, by their standard barrier, Regius, Descartes' one time, I like to think they can agree with all this. I'm going to gabble the next bit because I think it's interesting, but it seems to me that there is one truly interesting version of physicsalism, and that's called ontic structural realism. So I raise my hat, my more than merely structural hat, to Ladyman et al. When they move on from epistemic structural realism, the secure point that all physics can tell us about is mathematically expressible structure, to all-out ontic structural realism, the claim that structure literally is all there is to reality, ontologically speaking. So spectacularly, but wholly consistently, ontic structural realists, I quote, reject the dichotomy between the abstract and the concrete, the substantival and the structural, which they have to do. It seems to me, though, that the fact that they're obliged to reject that dichotomy is a reductio of their position. So I'm not going to say any more about that, but I just thought I'd mention it. I think it's a very glamorous idea and somehow attractive. I don't think we can reject the dichotomy between the concrete and the abstract. It's cool, but you can't. The natural is, in any case, the concrete real. It's the concrete real, whatever it is, whatever its nature. Our question is then, what do we know about... what do we know about the physical? We're aware that the less we can claim to know about the nature of concrete reality, the less we can exclude as definitely non-natural or supernatural or illusory. So again, what do we know? Let's hope we know something, otherwise we won't be able to exclude anything as supernatural. Well, here things get very basic. What are the data when it comes to concrete reality? Is there anything about concrete reality that we know with certainty? Is there anything that we therefore know we'll have to take account of in our theory of concrete reality, whatever else is or isn't the case? Well, when we ask this question, we get first a very old answer. We know each of us individually that we exist, as Descartes pointed out in the second meditation. We also encounter more general certainty, as Descartes also pointed out in the second meditation. We encounter the fact of consciousness, the fact of conscious experience, the fact of the subjective qualitative character or experiential what-its-likeness character of experiences. This, the fact of the existence of conscious experience, is the most certainly known fact about concrete reality. It is therefore, for any genuine naturalist, anyone who takes the concrete real to be entirely natural, the most certainly known natural fact, conscious experience. It is therefore for any real physicalist naturalist the most certainly known physical fact. This point is acknowledged by almost all philosophers up to Carnap, at least, and almost all philosophers since. Only a vanishingly small group of philosophers has ever denied it, beginning in the 20th century. The oddity is that these deniers have not only called themselves naturalists and physicalists, even as they deny the most certainly known natural fact, and therefore, on their view, a physical fact. But they have furthermore thought that their being physicalist is what has given them reason to deny it. This is an astonishing state of affairs. These people suffer, as Russell says, from a, I quote, a deep confusion in their imaginative picture of matter. And I find there's comedy in the fact that they are, in embracing this confusion, that is, thinking that consciousness can't be physical. They're unwittingly following their supposed arch-enemy Descartes and taking their wholly unwarranted Cartesian view of the incompatibility of matter and experience to be diagnostic of truly hard-nosed physicalist naturalism. But as Russell says, is he up there? Yeah. The physical, that is, non-mental world, is only known as regards certain abstract features of its space-time structure, features which, because of their abstractness, do not suffice to show whether the physical world is or is not different in intrinsic character from the world of mind. And Kant says exactly the same thing, but of course in his own special metaphysical system. So as far as the noumenal is concerned, he says, that which is the ground of the appearances of objects, we don't know that it's different from that which is the ground of the appearances of mental phenomena in a sense. Right. So where am I? As a physicalist naturalist, I assume that experiences are spatio-temporally located events, neural, electrochemical goings-on. I'm also going to assume for the moment, and in line with common opinion, that experiences have, as such, in having mass, charge, shape, size, and so on, certain irreducibly non-experiential concrete properties. Now that is an assumption, but I'm not going to go into that. In order to make my next point, I'm going to use the plural count noun experience to talk of experiences, plural, as things which have non-experiential, non-structural concrete properties, in addition to experiential properties. And with this in place, and principally just to avoid using the word consciousness, which is basically ruined, because it's been used to mean everything, I'm going to use the plural lacking mass term experience to refer to that part or aspect of reality, concrete reality, that consists in the existence of the experiential what-its-likeness properties of experiences considered just as such and nothing else. So my terminology is this: mass term experience is a matter of the experiential what-its-likeness properties of count noun experiences. I'm aligned with experiences may have non-experiential being and having mass and charge and stuff. So by experience, the mass term I mean phenomenology in the recent use of the word to denote not the academic discipline of the study of experience, but the object of that study, experience itself. So having assumed that physical reality has some concrete, non-experiential character, we don't also have to assume that it has experiential character, because this, as remarked, is the most certainly known natural fact about concrete reality, which we've already assumed to be wholly physical. Given that concrete reality is physical, and of course this is in a sense ad hominem to people who do define themselves as physicalist naturalists. They've already accepted that. Given that, we know that physical reality has experiential character. It may be that all physical reality has some experiential character, or it may be that physical reality has experiential character only when organized in certain specific ways, as it is in brains, for example. Either way, all realistic, serious physicalist naturalists are outright realists about experience, about the experiential qualitative character of consciousness, experiential what it's likeness, simply because it's the most certainly known natural fact. It's the most certainly known fact about physical reality. Realistic naturalists respect the basic data of experience, most notably experience itself. They can see that there's no warrant for leaping over their starting data, which is the data of experience itself, into a theory of the nature of the physical from which it follows that some reductive or irrealist account of experience must be true. So to do that, to go irrealist about qualitative character, is not only wild metaphysics, it also has no positive warrant in physics, nor in any position that can legitimately claim to be naturalistic. And yet this is precisely what many who now call themselves naturally do. They think that the deliverances of physics give them reason to doubt the basic data of experience. This is what made the 20th century the silliest century in the whole history of philosophy, indeed of human thought. And it ain't over yet, unfortunately. I thought it would die out when we got into the 20th century. So look, we can try the hypothesis that experience or phenomenology is illusory or unreal. But in this case, we admit, as we must, that it seems there is experience or phenomenology, while claiming that there isn't really any. But that leaves the illusion, the seeming, in place as a natural fact, hence a wholly physical fact. How am I getting on? And now a familiar and irresistible argument just refutes the hypothesis that it's an illusion. The problem is, I'm embarrassed even to have to say it, but the problem is that the illusion already possesses by hypothesis the very properties whose illusoriness is being hypothesized. The phenomenon of their seeming to be experience, the phenomenon we're supposing to be an illusion, can't exist unless there really is experience. So then it has done it quite explicitly. I suppose we should credit him with that at least. This is a quotation. There is no such thing as phenomenology. Here he's using it in the bad, in the sense of experiential what it's likeness. There seems to be phenomenology. These are his italics, but it does not follow from this undeniably, universally attested fact that there really is phenomenology. But in fact it does follow for the reason just given. For there to seem to be phenomenology just is for there to be phenomenology. When it comes to experience, you can't open up the is-seems gap. To suggest, as Dennett seems to, that the apparently sensory aspects of phenomenology are in some sense illusory because they aren't the product of sensory mechanisms in the way we suppose, but are somehow generated by processes of judgment. That isn't an argument. That's just to put forward a surprising hypothesis about part of the mechanism of this rich seeming. It's in no way to put in question its existence or reality. Whatever the process by which the seeming arises, the end result of the process is, as Dennett agrees, at least this, that it seems as if one is having phenomenally rich experience of, well, this is his example, green, golden sunlight, Vivaldi violins, and so on. And if there is this seeming, then once again there just is phenomenology. Why should anyone think that experience is illusory? i.e., and let's be clear about this as Dennett is, that it doesn't really exist. Does a naturalist or a physicalist have some good reason to think this which other people don't? No, again, I'm repeating myself. We know that experience exists, and none of us, physicalists or not, have any good reason to think we know anything about the physical that gives us any reason to find any problem in the idea that experiential phenomena in all their glory are wholly physical phenomena. It's not as if the conservation principles of physics provide reason to think this, or the thesis of the causal closure of the physical. And you might as well think that the efficacy of the binary system raises doubts about the validity of the decimal system. And realistic naturalists know this. They know enough about our ignorance, in fact our inescapable ignorance, to know that there are no good grounds for thinking that anyone could ever discover anything about the physical that could provide good grounds for doubting the reality of experience. So I've got, summarising, they've got three main charges against false naturalism, and then I'll add a fourth. Charges are connected but distinct. The first is that false naturalism denies the most certainly known natural fact, and is already, and for that reason alone, the silliest view ever put forward in the history of human thought, not excluding all religious views. The second is a kind of topping on that silliness. Independently of being the most certainly known natural fact, the denial is provably false. That's kind of extra. It's not just obviously false, it's provably false, because we can't open up the is-seems gap. The third is that nothing in physics or science supports it in any way. And the fourth new charge, well, it's a little longer. It's that when philosophers argue from physicalism or naturalism to the non-existence of experience, the argument isn't just wrong, it gets things exactly the wrong way around. It's kind of perfectly wrong. So, here we go. If we call... Wait, have I lost the screen? Oh, I've lost my argument. I've lost the key screen, but never mind, you just have to concentrate. The argument has 4 steps. Step 1. Okay, I'm defining E. I'm using E and NE. I'm really sorry I haven't got the slide there. So E is experience, and NE is something defined as intrinsically wholly non-experiential, which is what most people think the physical is. They think it. So if concrete reality contains something other than E, experience, that we as naturalists take to be a natural phenomenon, for example, physical stuff conceived as it usually is as something that is in its non-structural intrinsic nature wholly non-experiential, call that NE, and which is such that we find it hard to understand how E exists if NE exists, given the relation we suppose to exist between E and NE, then NE must be a problem for naturalism, but not E, just to expand. So this is the standard position. We know that the physical exists and it's non-experiential. We then have a problem. How does experience exist? How do we fit it into the order? And this is the standard mind-body problem, at least for all materialists. So they're saying, so I'm saying, if there is something other than the experiential, the non-experiential, then it's the non-experiential that must be the problem for physics. Sorry, for naturalism, not the experiential. We're in no position to say, as naturalists, look, any, the non-experiential, certainly exists, and you think of that, it's hard, isn't it? The non-experiential certainly exists as a matter of natural fact, and it's this is what we are not in a position to say, that any certainly exists as a matter of fact, and it's most unclear, given any, and the relation we suppose to exist between any and E, how E is possible, and perhaps E is not possible. This is the standard position. How on earth do we fit in experience to the natural order? We're not in the position to do that. We may be in the position to say that if anything non-experiential exists as a matter of natural fact, then, given the relation we suppose to exist between NE and E, it's most unclear how E is possible. But then we have to switch things around and say, well, look, E, the experience, certainly exists as a matter of certain natural fact. So it's most unclear how NE is possible, given the relation we suppose to exist between NE and E. And we have, in fact, no good reason to believe that NE is actual, no good reason to believe that there is anything non-experiential. So in other words, we have no reason to think that physical stuff is wholly non-experiential in its fundamental nature. In fact, we have no reason not to think that physical stuff is wholly experiential in its fundamental nature. It may also be that we have no very strong positive reason to think that that is true. I've got too many negatives. No strong reason to deny that some physical stuff is partly non-experiential in its fundamental nature. We can't support... oh, I have got numbers here. Have I? Have they gone? Whoops. Well, I'm going backwards. Oh, because it's upside down. Right. So I'm saying we've got no reason to think that physical stuff is wholly non-experiential in its fundamental nature. No reason not to think that it's wholly experiential. It's true we have no positive reason to think that, i.e. to be panpsychists. We've got no strong reason to deny that some physical stuff is partly non-experiential in its fundamental nature. We can't support too strongly by reference to the fact that, as Russell said, I quote, we know nothing about the intrinsic non-structural quality of physical events except when these are mental events that we directly experience. Now, that is a very important fact, that the only thing we have direct acquaintance with in the physical is the experiential or mental. But it doesn't support too strongly. But we do have some reasons to favour to physical stuff is wholly experiential, and those are standard reasons of theoretical economy, parsimony, simplicity, and elegance. And this is because what we do know is that some physical stuff is wholly experiential in nature. Whatever is the case with respect to its fundamental nature, we know that modern physical stuff is experiential in nature under the mild, if extraordinarily intricate, conditions found in the brain. And given that some physical stuff is certainly experiential in nature, two is the simplest hypothesis, that all physical stuff is, in its fundamental non-structural nature, wholly experiential in all conditions and in all respects and all the way down. Well, that's pure panpsychism. It makes a claim to be the most plausible version of hard-nosed physicalist naturalism. I call it pure panpsychism because it goes beyond the version of panpsychism according to which all physical stuff has experiential being in addition to non-experiential being. In this way, it avoids a dualism of radically, fundamentally different kinds of being. Because if any two kinds of being are radically different, then experientiality and non-experientiality are. Pure panpsychism also avoids the great burden of one. The great burden of one is a commitment to a doctrine of radical emergence, according to which experientiality emerges from non-experientiality. At the same time, two leaves the whole of physics untouched. It leaves everything true in physics untouched. It certainly, and again, it doesn't encounter any conflict with the principle of the causal closure of the physical or the conservation principles. Just as some brain activity literally is experientiality, just as the energy which is that brain activity is experientiality, so too, on this view entirely generally, the energy which is the physical in general is experientiality. Well, it may be said that panpsychism brings special problems with it. Problems about how small patches of experientiality of the sort that presumably exist if things like brains really consist of distinct physical pieces, i.e., e.g., fundamental particles. Problems about how they combine to constitute human experientiality. Right? But these problems are not harder than the problems faced by the view that physical stuff is in its fundamental nature something that is either wholly or even partly non-experiential. We already know that there's a great deal we don't understand about the being of experientiality if panpsychist naturalism is true, even though there's also a great deal we do know, given that the having of experience is the knowing. It's a relation of direct acquaintance. So we know there's a great deal we don't understand about experientiality because if panpsychist naturalism is true, there's a great deal we don't understand about the being of experientiality, given that it's such that all those numerical and otherwise structural truths of physics are true of it. I mean, it doesn't. If carbon and oxygen and nitrogen and those numbers are somehow part, if those numerical descriptions are true descriptions of the very thing that is my experience, my visible experience now, it just isn't showing up. So there's a great deal we don't know. Well, actually, I'm not particularly disposed to argue for panpsychism. And I've argued that there's no reason to favour the view that the energy patterns of which physics gives structural descriptions are fundamentally non-experiential in their structural nature. No reason to favour that view over the view that they're fundamentally experiential in their non-structural nature. Especially given that we know that some of them are experiential in nature. Some may think that we have positive reason not to think that physical stuff is fundamentally experiential, because we have no positive evidence for its experientiality except in the case of our own brains. This is no positive reason to think the physical stuff, other than the physical stuff that constitutes our brains, is not fundamentally experiential in nature, for we have no evidence for its non-experientiality either. If we ask what evidence is there for the existence of non-experiential reality as opposed to experiential reality, the answer is easy and it's mathematically precise. Zero. There is zero evidence. There's zero observational evidence for the existence of any non-experiential reality, nor will there ever be any. All there is one great big, wholly ungrounded, wholly question-begging theoretical intuition. So much for any naturalism that involves a commitment to the existence of non-experiential concrete reality. Well, that isn't just the boring point that there's a sense in which we can't break out of the experiential because experience is all we know for certain to exist. Our certainty that there is experiential reality and our relative uncertainty that there's anything else doesn't provide any grounds at all for an argument that there's nothing but experiential reality. Nor does the fact that experientiality is the only concrete thing whose nature we have some direct acquaintance with provide any grounds for the view that everything concrete is experiential. And I'm not arguing that we have reason to suppose that everything's experiential because there's a fundamental sense in which we have no positively, descriptively contentful conception of the non-experiential. And so we can't even, this is sort of anti-realistic, we can't even genuinely formulate the hypothesis that there is any non-experiential concrete reality. Because it's true, there's a sense in which we can't attain a positively, descriptively contentful conception of non-experiential concrete reality. The point is made by Berkeley and Kant, and it doesn't follow from the fact that one has no positive conception of something that the notion is therefore incoherent or unintelligible in such a way that we can't coherently suppose it to exist. I guess I'm just going to stop. I'm clear, as you can see, I'm not trying to, maybe you think I am, I'm not actually trying to convince anyone who disagrees with me this, because it's well known sort of psychological fact that if you heavily criticize a view with which other people hold, they just hold it even more strongly than before. So I'm just saying what I think is true. Okay, that's it.
Okay, down the front there.
If I accept your, well, you said you don't like the word panpsychism, so if I say ESFD.
No, I don't mind the word. I don't mind the word.
Okay, well, if I accept your panpsychism metaphysics, is it therefore a legitimate inquiry to use, say, Russellian methods to rationally reconstruct what it's like to be a table?
I don't think there's anything like to be a table.
Well, if it's,
Part J. Philip Goff.
I've got physical experiential properties because I'm made of stuff that's got physical experiential properties. So it's a table. Why is there something it's like to me?
Because even if I think that every particle that constitutes the table has experientiality, I don't think that table-like collections of those things constitute something to experience.
Okay, so there's still room for a sort of
it's
functionalist story.
Yes, I do not think that tables and chairs have experience. Nor even iPhones.
Sean, then David Pafner.
Two questions. Firstly, while Russell was making these comments, his sometime collaborator Alfred North Whitehead was
Yes.
proposing precisely the
Yes.
the thesis with regard to nature that you've put forward in extremely sophisticated terms. So this is a question about history of philosophy. What do you think happened? Why did Whitehead disappear?
Well,
Entirely
yeah,
what do I... The first question. Second question. I agree. This line here, stuff is wholly experiential in its fundamental non-structural nature. I think I agree with that completely. My question is, why add on the word physical? Why not call this what it is, which is a version of philosophical idealism, and admit that that the only coherent naturalism is in fact a form of philosophical idealism?
No, well, the word idealism is such a sort of wreckage site that I would never use it. I mean, wait, I'll maybe have to say something about this. Berkeley is a mentalist. He's an idealist with respect to the external world. He doesn't think everything is ideas, he thinks they are minds. So idealism is, as we know it, is nearly always with respect to tables and chairs. So this is not idealism, because I think there are subjects of experience, and I think that's what panpsychism is. But going back to the history question, I don't know, I thought about it. I think that I can only really speak for analytic philosophy, and I think that there were these two papers in 1958 and 9 by Ullin Place and Jack Smart that somehow grabbed everyone's attention, because the Russell view was very clearly in place, certainly up to about 1956, I think, when Feigl expounded it in an influential article, and then it just disappeared. What's odd about, there's a huge sort of disconnect between philosophy of mind and philosophy of science, though. Philosophy of science, they were always, I think, continued to be aware of this, but it somehow got lost in the discussion in philosophy of mind and discussion of consciousness. Is there another bit that you had?
No, those are the two bits.
Yeah. Yeah. Why do I call it physical?
Those two papers, were so.
Yeah. No, but you also said, why do I go on calling it physical? That's a good question in a way. It's partly just to annoy people, but I mean, it's just but I can justify it. So I define the physical by ostension, or if you like, I just say, or by it's what we're talking about. We do not know anything. We don't know as much as we thought we knew about its nature. And then I say physical is a natural kind term.
Yeah, but you think there are plenty of things that are physical, or aspects of the physical you can't point at. You can't point at E
or
F equals MA, but you think that they are, well, you said that they're true or good approximations to truth. So
sure.
You think they're part of concrete.
Part of, yeah, well.
The physical.
Well, I mean,
they're not
what I think is, maybe there's some sense in which it's true that all there are particles, but those particles do have a certain intrinsic nature, which is such that they behave in a certain law-governed way. But that's all there is. But I'm just saying, what I'm really saying to the physicalists, I'm talking about the same things you're talking about: the tables and the chairs and the VDUs and the.
Maybe this will help on this issue. So I'm very orthodox contemporary physicalist. But I think I agree with everything you said. Perhaps when it came to the panpsychism, I'm rather sympathetic that maybe in that respect I'm not entirely orthodox.
Yeah.
But you had in mind some bunch of people who deny consciousness, who are false methods, and I just don't know
who they are.
Look, so here's the orthodox view.
Well, I'll give you Dan Dennett is the one.
I want you there. That conscious properties are one and the same as certain physical properties. When you have those physical properties, it's like something for you. That's the standard view. It's just your view. Many people will agree, and so do I, that we actually refer to these properties indirectly by description. We don't, in science, get direct access to their nature. We agree about that too. You have Dennett. I can give you a couple more. George Ray is a limited about consciousness. Cathy Wilkes was sometimes a limited about. That's it. I mean,
Manolo, would you like to declare yourself? Is he here? I know you're running this line, and I'm saying what's happened is that 30 years ago, nearly all these people were really denying the existence of consciousness. Now they're sort of pretending that they're not, and they're engaging in the very sleight of hand that you're engaging in when you say that you're a reductive materialist. You just say, I mean, there aren't two things, there's only one.
Okay, you think that there are people who do this, but there really aren't. Now, 30 years ago, go back before NATO, there was a whole widespread tradition, and it was a kind of fashion. People weren't supposed to talk about consciousness, and I mean, and we didn't, and to some extent it was kind of brushed away. But that's absolutely not the case anymore.
Good.
Since
So, I mean, you could be saying I paid it a waste of time because everybody already believes it. I don't think that's true. And I've done. No, I think your judgment.
Again, we're having a discussion here. I say to you, everybody does believe your paper.
Right, this is reaching a cybernetic minimum. Can we perhaps we can continue this in the bar? But there are three additional
I'm really
questions.
Glad.
If we can, so David very quickly, and then Dermot very quickly. Thanks.
Well, I thank you for a very refreshing paper, and I think I wanted to say tentatively that it seems your argument up to a point and maybe beyond that point seems very compatible with the problem that's plaguing phenomenologists like Merleau-Ponty and Husserl.
I certainly feel there shouldn't be any incompatibility.
Yeah. Except I think the next step for them is saying, look, we've got the experience part is the thing where we'll do our work and try and clean things up there in order to get an understanding of how it is that we do engage with the physical broader without, I think, a skepticism that not with the view that certainly we'll get to the bottom of it, but with not being skeptical that there's something there to talk about. It's just sort of realizing that we need to be really empirical in figuring out what the base of our claims is, starting from the experiential that you're talking about and taking it very seriously in its own terms. I suspect, though, that when you make the panpsychic move, or entertain that, there might be a suspicion from the phenomenological side that might be sweeping the dualism sort of outside of ourselves in a way. I mean, this would take more work to talk about, but I think that there might be a sense of a problem there. And I think another shared point is...
you want some dualism?
Pardon?
You want that to be...
No, don't want a dualism, but I think a suspicion might be, well, that's another move of letting a dualism sneak in the back door once more, insofar as we're making a separation between the experiential and non-experiential is, well, they're at one in nature, but really somehow they're distinct. I need to get a better sense of what you mean there. But I think there's also a shared diagnosis that residues of Cartesianism are a problem.
I'm not sure there's a question there, but I certainly think that certain things present to us as being non-experiential. I happen to think that maybe in their intrinsic nature they are themselves also experiential. So that seems to be. You wouldn't want to deny that phenomenologically it seems as if there are things that are non-experiential.
No, wouldn't want to deny that.
So I just shoved that dualism into what the character of experience and where it should be okay, I think, from a phenomenological point of view.
Dermot, light speed?
Yeah, no, okay, very quickly. I think one of the reasons why there's denial of consciousness, I mean, obviously there's the influence of behaviorism, which is really important. Even on Quine, I mean, even though he supposedly allows for experiences. But secondly, a kind of bizarre version of the philosophy of language that sort of denied, say, dream states, said we have just a disposition to report stories or something like that. And that became so pervasive, nobody could talk about it. I mean, I think that's one of the things. Just on the other, second point I want to make, a lot of what you sounded like, a lot of your discussion sounded like Mach, and I just wanted to know what you thought about that.
No, I don't.
He begins, he's a physicist.
Yeah, but no.
He also thinks that experience is primary, and we go through the experiences.
No, but it's not. No, I don't want to hang out with him. He's a positivist in the worst kind of way. You see, the thing is that really, David Plattner is one of the good guys and has always been. I don't think he realizes that there are people who are committed, as you say, behaviorists, functionalists. Now, there's a certain kind of strong representationists. They're all denying the existence of experience.
Okay, I'm afraid we really have to stop it there. I know and I want to thank all the speakers, beginning with Professor Strawson, who's just given a very stimulating, I think very appropriately placed talk. So thank you very much to all of you for coming, and thank you very much to all the speakers.